My life was pretty ordinary until little Landry's accident. He was my younger brother, after all, and we called him Little Landry because he was the younger of us too. We were named Landry after our dad, and being the older sibling, it was my job to look out for him. We walked to school together, went to the store, played games, and watched movies together. Dad always told us Landrys should stick together, and we did, until I made a terrible mistake, one no older sibling should make. We were playing tag, but too close to the road. Little Landry was just 6, and I was 11, so he didn't know better. When I tagged him, he took off running and dashed right into the street. I shouted for him to stop, but he thought it was part of the game and kept going right under a car that was speeding down the road. What happened next is a blur, but I know that 2 months later, we were back home, just the 3 of us Landrys. But life wasn't the same anymore. Little Landry couldn't do much of anything. The doctors said he had broken his neck, his face, and his skull. They claimed it was a miracle he was even alive, but they also warned Dad that he might not be truly living, if you catch my drift. They suggested to Dad that he should consider putting little Landry down. Dad nearly got arrested, he was so furious about it. Regardless, we brought little Landry home, because us Landrys were supposed to stick together. But there was something off about him. His eyes were always open, but only the whites showed. His irises seemed rolled back into his head. His mouth was perpetually agape, stretched into a grotesque grin, like some kind of drunken clown. The stitches and scars from his accident crisscrossed his face in a way that felt utterly wrong. He just lay in bed day in and day out, staring blankly, not moving or talking at all. Was he dead? Not quite, because he still breathed, but it was this unsettling, crackling sound. He ate, but you had to move his mouth for him, and he went to the bathroom, but you had to clean up after him. I even had to drop out of school to take care of him, as Dad had to work a lot to keep the house and cover little Landry's needs. So, most days, it was just me and little Landry at home, and I started to lose my grip on reality. I'd sit next to him, taking care of him, reading books aloud in the hopes he could hear, or blasting the TV in another room for the same reason. All the while, he just stared at me with those empty white eyes and that disturbing, twisted grin. I swear, I began to see that face in my dreams. Sometimes, I'd wake up in the middle of the night feeling like little Landry's horrifying visage was looming over me, like when you look at a bright light and then turn away, but the spot remains. But that was nonsense. Little Landry never moved. He just lay there, watching me with that eerie breath sound filling the silence. Then one day, Dad came home in a frenzy. He barged through the door, slamming it behind him. Before I could say anything, he shouted down the hallway, "Landry." I hurried over, saying, "Hi, Dad," but he didn't reply. Instead, he was staring at a crumpled note that looked like it had been stuck in a dusty corner for years. A glimmering patch of white on the wall suggested where he found it. "What's this?" Dad asked, glaring at me. "I don't know," I replied, trying to keep it together. I knew that look. When he crinkled his forehead, it meant trouble. "I don't know what's gotten into you, kid," he growled. "Nothing else is going on, Dad," I said. "Yeah, right," he shot back, shoving the note into his pocket before stomping down the hall to his room. He didn't even check on little Landry, which was typical after the first few months. I kept wondering what the note said and why Dad was so upset about it. I racked my brain as I went about my day, even checking the trash to see if he'd thrown it away, but no luck. So, I decided to drop it. I returned to little Landry's room, picked up a book about animals, and started reading aloud, hoping he could hear me. Before long, I noticed something strange. Little Landry's grin was wider than it had been earlier. That twisted smile had stretched even further, and his breathing sounded a little more labored. It creeped me out, especially since his eyes hadn't changed. They remained those unsettling, blank whites. I called Dad over to see, but he was annoyed with me and didn't want to get out of his chair. Frustrated, I insisted he come take a look. Reluctantly, he followed me into the room, but when he saw little Landry, he merely said, "He's the same as he's always been." But I could have sworn that grin had morphed back to its normal size. "Did you see that?" I pressed. Dad looked a bit pale. I didn't see anything, he said, frowning before stepping out of the room. He kept going, right out the front door. That was the last time I saw him. From then on, it was just me and little Landry. I couldn't handle his needs on my own. I got some advice from Lori, our neighbor, who suggested I write to the government for help since little Landry and I were now orphans. I had no better idea, so I decided to take her advice. A few days later, I saw the mailman drop a letter into our mailbox. I rushed outside, eager to see if it was from the government offering assistance. As I reached the mailbox, Lori happened to be out for a walk. I smiled and waved at her as I pulled the letter out. "Oh, your dad's back, kid." "That's great," she exclaimed. What a strange comment, I thought, narrowing my eyes at her. "No," I replied, shaking my head. "Ma'am," Lori murmured, "I'm so sorry, hon. I just thought that was who was in your kitchen." She gave an apologetic wave and continued on down the sidewalk. Puzzled, I spun around and almost tripped over myself. In the kitchen, behind the screen curtain, I saw the faint outline of someone. But no one was home except little Landry and me. Confused, I ran back inside, straight to the curtain, but no one was there. The kitchen looked just the same as it always did, except now there was a small yellow note on the wall. I peeled it off, leaving a clean patch that stood out against the dusty wall. Squinting at the faded yellow scrap, I saw bold letters scrawled across it. "Don't." It didn't make any sense, and it certainly didn't answer why I'd seen a figure standing there in the first place. Trying to steady myself, I started creeping around the house, hoping to catch sight of whoever, or whatever, I thought I'd seen. The floorboards creaked ominously beneath me, each sound more unsettling than the last. But there was no one else in the house. I finally worked up the nerve to check little Landry's room. I'd been in there so many times, but this time, fear kept me frozen in the doorway. Landry lay in his crib, just like always, with that blank stare and eerie smile on his face. My mind raced as I imagined him somehow getting up and wandering to the kitchen, standing there, watching as Lori and I talked outside. But that was impossible. Landry never moved. He just lay there, staring, day and night. Maybe the figure had just been a trick of the light, I tried to convince myself. I didn't believe it, but what else was I going to tell myself? I returned to the kitchen and went back to opening an envelope from the government. As I read the letter, I had to sit down, just to process it. It said they wanted to send me to a boarding school and that they'd cover all the expenses. That part didn't sound so bad. But then they said it was time to reevaluate Landry's situation. They said it would have to be my decision, since Dad wasn't around anymore. The whole thing rattled me, especially because, deep down, I wanted to agree. Little Landry had been run over years ago, and since then, he just existed. Was I a terrible brother for considering letting go? The next day, still torn, I found another note. I was in the bathroom this time, and I only noticed it when I reached for the toilet paper. The air around it felt strangely warm as I peeled it off the wall. This time, the words were on the back, "Don't." If I hadn't just been to the bathroom, I swear I would have lost control. I scrambled out of there and ran straight to Landry's room. There he was, same as ever. But his smile, it was wider somehow. Unnerved, I started shouting at him. "Why won't you say something, Landry? Why won't you do anything?" But he just lay there, as he always did. I felt like I was losing my mind. Later that day, I grabbed the phone and called the number from the government's letter. I told them I was ready to go through with their plans for me and for Landry. I just had to get out of there. 3 days later, hospital staff came to take Landry. And in those 3 days, more notes kept appearing all over the house. I was too shaken to read them, tearing them off the walls without even looking at the words. By the time the hospital people arrived, every wall was covered in patches of clean, fresh paint where the notes had been. When they finally took Landry away on a stretcher, I thought I'd feel relief. But I didn't. Not at all. I spent the rest of that day sitting on the porch, bags packed, waiting for my ride to take me to boarding school. When I arrived at the school, I just wanted to get to my dorm room and go to bed. After a quick tour and meeting a few teachers, I was finally shown to my room. I had it to myself, which was a relief. I could go straight to bed undisturbed. I didn't sleep well, though. I kept dreaming of Landry, that horrible grin, those vacant eyes. At one point, I woke up, feeling like he was right there, slumped over me. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, the faint light from my bedside lamp casting shadows around the room. And then I saw it, a small yellow note on the wall opposite my bed. My stomach dropped as I climbed out of bed and inched closer. I peeled it off the wall, and there, written in familiar handwriting, were the words, "Bad brother." Frozen, I tried to catch my breath. Then I noticed something strange about the spot on the wall where the note had been. My dorm walls were cleaner than the ones back home, but this patch looked different. As I leaned in, I realized it wasn't just a clean patch, it was more like a hole. And what I saw peering out through that tiny gap, glinting in the light, looked disturbingly like an eye. Then I heard it. The note was still in my hand, but I heard it just as clearly as before, that soft, unmistakable snapping, like breathing.